Can you hear me back there? I guess not. Hey. Okay, a hand went up at the very back. Thanks a lot. I want to thank you for having me here. What I'd like to do today is to talk about one aspect of the areas that we could look at for growth. And what I want to get into here is the end user data business. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm going to be talking about data and data analytics, but I'm not talking about big data the way we typically talk about it, and I'm not talking about scientific data. This is a very, very narrow topic, which is we're now collecting lots of end user data. People are coming to our websites and we're logging that. People are clicking for downloads and we're logging that. What can we do with that data? Does this represent a growth opportunity? So what I'm going to be doing here is going through a couple of scenarios about how to use this data and try to evaluate what the opportunities are. You know, we're going to begin with the assumption that, just as Michael was saying, we're dealing with a situation of stalled growth. It is very difficult to find robust growth right now in scholarly communications. Where will we find that growth? But I think that the real answer to find that growth has to do with beginning to investigate some properties of digital media. Now, this is a different way of talking about things than saying this is a marketing issue or a sales issue. We're really talking about beginning to rethink the basic editorial structure of what we do in the first place. I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios. For example, direct sales, direct-to-consumer sales, D2C, direct-to-consumer. We want to talk about the collection of end-user information to inform marketing plans and even editorial strategies. We should be talking a little bit about packaging metadata and selling it to third parties. And we also have to get into the very ticklish question of what it means to create new products and how do we market them. Now, as Michael was saying, we have constraints on growth, and it's actually worse than that. It's not only having trouble growing, but we're also getting margin pressure. We know that we have developed world markets that are mostly mature. We're not seeing 10% growth in the US market, for example. We know that there are issues with library funding. It is not as robust as desired. Of course, on the other hand, if we're as robust as librarians wanted it to be, we'd all start producing more and more things. So you're always going to have a crisis in library budgets. It's endemic to the nature of what we do. But the fact is everybody is disappointed that the level of library funding is simply not keeping up to the level of funding for the research. So we have a disconnect there between the amount of research and the amount of funded publication we could have. But I'm concerned myself about such things as what it means to go global. You know, if you say, well, we're selling things in North America, that's one thing, but now we're going to be selling things in Africa, we're going to be selling things in Asia. You now have to build that marketing infrastructure, and you find yourself sometimes having to do business in jurisdictions where people may not be entirely happy about the fact that, of the way we like to do business. This raises costs. Sometimes these costs are under the table costs, which is a very unattractive situation to be in. But the fact is that as we begin to globalize, we discover that some of the margins that we can bring to our businesses are probably not the margins we'd hoped for. There's new infrastructure costs. Now, the people in this room know something, and it would go without being said, except that everybody outside this room does not agree, and that is that open access actually increases costs. It undermines some revenue streams, and it puts pressure on margins. The specific example I like to use is that the average article earns about $5,000 in the marketplace today. And when you look at the cost of APCs and you move to Gold Open Access, they typically are below $5,000. We have PLOS One at $1,350. And of course, there's an interesting challenge of how do you close the gap between the $5,000 average and the $1,350 benchmark that PLOS One has put out there. So what we're seeing is all of these trends that not only stifle our growth, but also beginning to squeeze the margin out of the business. So let's think a little bit about digital media now. We know that it enables extensive data collection. We've never seen anything like this before. Compared to print, we have far, far more data about end users. That means there's more opportunity to analyze that, but also more uncertainty. We don't really know how to use it, perhaps. When we look at this, we look at all of this material that we're beginning to collect. We're collecting, you know, every click, every view, every referral, every download. You know, it's almost unbelievable how many numbers we're collecting and all this data that's being collected. The fact is that the future of this is still unknown. We're beginning to make small inroads into using this data, but by and large, we're collecting data that we have not yet fully been able to exploit yet. And it gets better or worse, depending on your point of view. So we know that if you're dealing with end-user data, there are entire companies whose business is database management for consumer data. These are companies that have for decades been selling consumer data to magazine publishers, for example, and newspaper publishers and so forth. And all those catalogs you get in the mail, if you still get catalogs in the mail, we certainly do, all of them know something about our household. You know, they know that our kids are out of the house now. It was interesting. Some of the catalogs stopped. But I will say, and I can't say that I enjoy this, we're also getting all these catalogs now for old people. I'm saying, wait a second. I like the fact that they identified the kids, but I was a little bit concerned to be put on the mailing list for the AARP. So you have the opportunity not only to collect user data, but to use some of the tactics of consumer direct marketers. You can go out there and buy data. You can now fill out more and more fields of data. We've never had an opportunity like this before. Now, there's a catch, and the catch is, well, what about privacy? That's a tough one. I'm going to get back to that one here in a moment. But the issue about data collection reminds us that, you know, we're living in the age of Snowden, or we're living in the world where we got the NSA. And if they don't scare you, how about Facebook? How about Google? And can we as a community participate in issues and activities that some people may feel are violating our privacy? So on one hand, you've got, as business people, we want more data. We want identifiable data. We want more data that we can link to other data. We want to exploit that data. As citizens, we might say, well, wait a second. As consumers, we say, no way. So we have to figure out some way of resolving this conflict. I want to spend just 1 minute to talk about the print era and what that meant. It is not true that we had no end-user data with print. Of course we did. We had individual subscriptions. And individual subscriptions were mailed. And if they were mailed, suddenly you realize you have the most important piece of information you could ever have as a marketer. You have a zip code. And we know that zip codes are important because people always like to live around people like themselves. Yeah. That has tremendous social implications and political implications, but the economic implications are very, very clear. Most of your neighbors are very much like you. So when you had print subscriptions, you were collecting zip codes, and that provided a lot of data. But you have to then ask yourself, what were you doing with that data? I mean, how many people who were mailing, the Journal of Podiatric Medicine, or something on genomics, or whatever that happened to be, a print thing, how many people then were looking at that zip code? How many of them were licensing that database information? How many then were using them as an opportunity to sell somebody snowshoes or whatever it is that direct marketers want to sell us? So although we had access to a tremendous amount of end-user data in that print era by mailing things to physical addresses, the fact is that database marketing has never been a very big part of this community outside of one small segment, surprisingly, which is the university press segment, which has for decades been mailing subject matter catalogs to scholars all around the world, and that is still a profitable activity today in print, believe it or not. It's just really counterintuitive. There's another curious thing about the print business, and that is that print products exist in silos. You have one journal here, a journal there, you might have a book program. All these products tend to be discrete. Well, we know in the digital world the tendency is to try to mush all these things together and to create databases of some kind. In the print era, all this end-user data really was siloed. We were not looking for ways of exploiting that data across the various properties we had. So when we compare print and digital, we really have very, very different fundamentals driving these marketing activities. So how can you use this end-user data to drive growth? I've got a list of a couple of options here, and I'm going to go through them one by one. One is you can sell things directly to end users, so-called direct-to-consumer sales. You can use the data to inform marketing editorial. You can take that metadata and you can package it and sell it to third parties. And of course, you have potential for new products, which is a tricky kind of business. So direct consumer sales first. this is really everybody's dream on the internet, right? We're going to sell things directly to end users. We're going to cut out the middlemen. We're going to increase our margins. We're going to reduce our costs. We'll collect more data so we can do even more of this. We get ourselves into a virtuous cycle. But when you look at it in practice, it starts to break down. It's probably best suited for books. Books are discrete items. You can sell things. But there's a challenge. And if you do this, if any of you are book publishers, you may have tried this. Most academic and professional book publishers, in fact, do sell books directly from their websites. The catch is that they have no traffic. And no traffic means no sales. And you then say, well, I'm going to invest in building my web traffic. And suddenly you make the interesting discovery that once you try to build web traffic, who are you competing with now? You're competing with Amazon, Yahoo, Netflix. Do you really want to play that game? Do you have the money to play that game? So the problem with the direct-to-consumer opportunity for books is the problem of being a web marketer as opposed to being a marketer in institutional markets, which is the real strength of most of the people sitting in this room today. If you try to get into direct-to-consumer sales for journals, you then run into the problem that most of the subscribers or prospective subscribers for your journals already have access through institutional subscriptions. We know that institutional subscriptions cannibalize individual subscriptions, and the best direct-to-consumer marketing machine in the world is not going to reverse that trend. So here again, that direct marketing isn't really bearing fruit. Well, then how about single articles? We can do some kind of a pay-per-view problem. But that problem is very ticklish. Putting aside the whole question of bringing people to your website and having to be a consumer marketer, you have the problem of channel conflict. You don't want to sell these articles for $2 and $5. You want to sell these articles at a high price so the institutional subscriptions don't go away. So you're essentially put into a channel conflict because you want to charge $35 for an article in a marketplace that probably is not going to want to pay that much except when there's a very pressing need. These, in other words, have become essentially institutional, not individual purchases, or corporate purchases for if you happen to be in the same field. So what you have with this whole direct-to-consumer sales opportunity here, despite the tremendous amount of end-user data, you have an opportunity, but it's a small opportunity. And when we talk about finding growth in academic and professional publishing, I think you'd have to say this is probably not going to be the biggest growth vehicle we have. On the other hand, you've captured the name, right? This is what direct marketers like to say. We're not going to just sell things. We're going to use this as a way of collecting that data. And we can put that data to so many new uses. We can collect marketing data. We can use this in order to improve our advertising. You know, the more data you have on your end users, you take that to advertisers and say, well, you should be advertising with us. And furthermore, you should be paying more money. That's what advertisers want, that end user information. You might recraft your entire marketing campaigns with this, but you start to run into problems here again. The decline in advertising in this industry segment is secular. It's not a question of not having enough end-user data. It's the fact that the amount of inventory available to us on the internet is simply growing exponentially. So there's no amount of end-user data is going to rebuild your advertising business. You might slow the decline down, but you're not going to rebuild that. And somebody else might say, well, yeah, we're not going to use it for marketing, but now that we have this end-user data, let's bring this over to the editorial department because we can use that then to help us reshape our products. We're going to use this end-user data, and the editors are going to look through this and start to discover what things are being read, when do people stop reading, and so forth. We have all that information now. Now, I think that's a terrific idea, and it really goes to show you somebody who's never worked with editors before. You know, because they resist this. Now, some don't. Some, of course, are progressive. But the most conservative voices in scholarly communications are, of course, the editors themselves. And when you try to bring them into the feedback loop with end-user data, you may find people then saying, well, wait a second. Keep your business stuff over there. There's a church and state separation, which is a very ticklish thing if you're a business guy in this industry segment. Keep your information over there. We don't want to touch that. We are going to stay in charge of that. So to try to proceed in a way where you can use the end-user data to inform editorial decision-making put you in this situation where you have to walk on tiptoe to make this happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen or it can't happen. I'm simply saying it's not the kind of thing where you can make a decision and move forward very aggressively. So my own view then is that this whole notion of using the end-user data to inform marketing editorial, it's a valuable activity. but the results may be highly specific and they may be small. Is this going to be the roaring growth opportunity that we're looking for? I don't think so. Now, on the other hand, we've got metadata, and I have put my favorite cartoon character, Scrooge McDuck, there, who's watering his money tree, and he is now going to package and sell user data. This is actually a pretty interesting idea, and I'm myself much more optimistic about this. And the reason is that it opens up new customers. So if you're publishing content, you're selling things to individuals and large institutions, and sometimes to industry and government. But suddenly you've got, for some areas, this end user data could be very valuable for other industries. So do we think that the pharmaceutical industry, for example, would like to have all of the end user activity for scientists dealing with chemistry databases? I think that they probably would. They want to know what kind of research is going on out there in the world. It gives us some insights into what the competition may be doing. It gives us some insights into where the scholarly community may be moving. So this whole packaging of this metadata, this end user material, and selling it then to third parties does in fact represent a bona fide business interest. Now, there are catches. It requires huge scale. This is not something that a single professional society with 2 or 3 journals is going to be able to do meaningfully. That scale means you're talking about the very largest publishers. We know those names. We're talking about the aggregators. We're talking about people like ProQuest and EBSCO and JSTOR. So the number of players that can actually participate in this area is very few, but it's a bona fide opportunity. Once again, though, we have to bear in mind that anonymity is essential. It's one thing to be collecting end user data. The idea that you're going to sell personally identifiable information to third parties, that is not going to happen, or it's not going to happen if you're careful, because it gets you into very serious trouble. So I think what we have here in this packaging and the reselling of end user data to third parties, we have a bona fide business opportunity that could bring new players into this industry. It is not self-evident that the incumbents have an advantage here. Now, privacy. We know we're snooping around, and we love to snoop around, and we don't know what we really want from this long term, though. We understand the business issues here. The thing I would say is that every company has to have a privacy policy now, and the reason is that because we are still, as a society, trying to figure out just how much information should be disclosed, we're in this ticklish situation that if you seem to be violating a line somewhere, your organization could suddenly find itself on every blog post in the country. We don't really want that. So it's necessary to have a privacy policy that's rigorously enforced, that probably is conservative, which may not speak to your best business interests, even if they speak to your civic interest. And you need that now, even in advance of really knowing what you're going to use with it, do with this data as you collect this. It is good to know that you can often work with anonymized data, but wouldn't you sometimes like to have the personal data as a business person? Just think about that. Do you really want everything to be anonymized? As a business person, don't you want to know more and more and more? So the privacy issues are absolutely a factor in any kind of modeling you might do for a business plan. Now, the real thing about data, it seems to me, is that for publishers, this is an entirely new area. The irony here is, for years, we've been publishing other people's data. We have scientific articles. We have our authors who work with huge data sets, and they are geniuses at manipulating these data sets. But when it comes to the internal data that we as publishers collect, we know very little. This is a new world for us. Because it's a new world, we don't really have enough precedent. We don't know where it's going. And this puts us into the very uncomfortable situation where someone can say, let's wait and see. We don't really know if we want to make this investment today. We don't really know if we want to have to monkey around with these privacy policies. Let's just see where it's going to go. And the problem with technology, every startup, sometimes when you wait and see, somebody gets a first mover advantage, and you really can't afford that to happen. So what it means as a practical matter, as business people, you have to then say, you have to go to your board and say, I have to make an investment in collecting end user data, and I have to hire data analysts to go through this. And guess what? I don't have a business plan. I don't know when I'm going to have a business plan. And to which I just say, welcome to the technology business. So it's probably best, I think, to think of end-user data as an emergent and promising property of digital media and networks. It's one that we have to invest in now, well before we can neatly articulate business plans and ROI projections. And that's a tough board meeting. By the way, my recommendation, bring a third party in to make that presentation to your board. Now, then there's a question of new products. Well, this is important. By new products, I mean something other than the journal article, the journal, or the book. The current products we have were largely designed, were not designed for end-user purchase. They were largely designed for various kinds of membership purchase or institutional purchases. So what we really have here is an ecosystem problem. And when we say, let's collect all this end-user data, what are we going to do with it as business people? We then come up with a problem that the products that we have created historically really were geared for institutional markets. So we need a whole new class of products. It really mandates developing that, so we have to start to think creatively about that. Now, what's the problem? Easier said than done. What's the new product going to look like? If you go to a chemist and say, we need a new product out of you, he says, I'll write you an article. So what is this new product? There's a whole level of imagination that has to be brought to the industry to generate growth. And this is really my core position, that when we talk about growth, we can't think of growth as an extension of the kinds of products we've been creating, serving the kind of markets we have been serving historically. We have to think about a bigger leap, an order of magnitude leap, and the end user data is simply a signal of the need to do that. I'm going to stop here. Thank you.